Oh, good morning. I guess it's afternoon. And Walter and I were just talking about what happened in the last section here of the story when Henny went bananas. Um, it was pretty unexpected, although I don't think Chief Petrovic was surprised. He and his one constable, Peter Herman, had seen this kind of behavior from her before, but it was quite a surprise. Again, we're talking about one of the main characters in this story. Where's the rest of the body? As you can tell, Henny is a complicated person. Uh, Anybody who cuts up their parents into parts has complications of some kind. As you'll recall, in the last part, that Henny's interview, Mr. Donaldson had appeared as a high-priced lawyer from Toronto, and he and Chief Petrovic had been interviewing Henny when I guess Chief Petrovic said the wrong words and Henny went berserk. She reached across the interview table, grabbed hold of the chief, got her teeth into his ear and tried to tear it off the side of his head. And eventually they broke up the struggle with the help of the constables who heard all the screaming and shouting. And they even managed to get Henny's teeth out of the chief's ear. So this is, a day or two later here, and they called. Donaldson knew a prominent psychiatrist who he felt he could have come in and talk to Henny to have her evaluated because even though her lawyer was top notch, she realized that if she had an outburst like this in the courtroom, it wouldn't be good for his case. So he's selected a doctor, a man called Kryscoff, to come and interview Henny to see what the underlying psychiatric problems are. So here we are on Wednesday, April 19th in 1933. And Dr. Kryscoff has arrived at the chief's office. Now, Alfred Kryscoff is a big man. He's about 6'2", a bit of a beard with traces of red. He's around 50 or so. And as he comes in, he's very affable. And he says, from my acquaintance, Mr. Donaldson, I understand you have a difficult prisoner. And I've come here to interview her. And they talk about it for a few minutes, and he notices the chief's ear, and he said, Donaldson told me that, and you got her teeth into your ear. It doesn't look too bad. You're not going to lose your ear, right? And so the chief says it took 7 stitches, but it's healing very well. Unfortunately, it didn't affect my hearing, said Chief Petrovic with a smile. He said, I'd like to speak to her this afternoon, but if I'm going to do that, I want a constable nearby, just in case there's a repeat of her behavior. So they make that arrangement, and by pure luck, I suppose, Joel Franklin, who's the hero of our story, ends up being the constable that is going to stay there and listen to see what's going on. So that afternoon, the interview is conducted in the interview room, which really is a supply room. And Joel is stationed outside, and from his place, he can hear the conversation. And as he listened, he heard Dr. Kryscoff introduce himself, sort of in a low-key fashion. Hi, how are you this afternoon? My name's Dr. Kryscoff. Your lawyer, John Donaldson, said I should come and have a chat with you. I'm working on your behalf with your lawyer, trying to see if we can sort through things. And after the conversation, she was surprised at Dr. Kryscoff's first question. He said, "What is your name?" Well, she looked at him and said, "Well, you're silly, doctor. You know my name. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here." "Oh, I'm sorry," he said. Yes, he said. "Would you spell your name for me?" And he sort of eased his way out of that little problem he created. So she spelled out, took a while because it's Henrietta Harriet McCann for the doctor. The next question he asked was, "Do you ever feel like you're someone else?" "What do you mean, doctor?" she asked. "Are you aware that you have episodes when you scream and rage for long periods of time, for hours?" "Oh, don't be silly. Who's been filling your head with nonsense?" she said. And he said, "Well, then why are you in jail?" "I'm not sure," said Henny. "I think it's something to do with my papers. I remember going to the lawyer's office in Toronto to collect my rightful inheritance. I remember presenting my papers, and they were legitimate. The lawyer left the room, and all of a sudden I'm surrounded by police, and they dragged me away to the police station." "Do you remember your car ride, Henny?" "No, I don't. I slept all the way from Toronto to Chaseford or Stratford." But as he talked to her, he could detect she was becoming a little agitated. "How do you feel now?" he said. "I'm becoming upset," she said. And then he said, "Do you know someone by the name of Millie?" "Oh, yeah, she's my live-in housekeeper in Springfield, Illinois. She's a good person. She's been very helpful to me. She made my arrangements for the train to get here and so on." So from where Joel was listening, he's assumed that Dr. Kryscoff had asked the question about Millie to sort of get her away from being agitated, to calm her down, to bring her back to what she was familiar with as Henny McCann. But then Kryscoff asked the question, "Who is Nancy Featherston?" Well, the reply was a growl. Remember, Joel's standing outside the door, so he hears this growl, and then he hears furniture being tossed around, and he hears screaming. He raced into the room and he found Dr. Kryscoff. Remember, he's a big man, doing his best to hold on to Henny McCann's arms. She was a match for him because of her temporary insanity. So Joel grabbed her right arm and pulled it behind her back, and Kryscoff managed to get a hold of her left arm, and they got her handcuffed. But once again, the police station and the surrounding area buildings were subjected to extreme loud yelling and cursing and words that made no sense. Well, Chief Petrovic burst through the door, followed by a couple of other constables, and they took Henny back to her cell. So then Dr. Kryscoff sat down with Chief Petrovic and said, "What do you think, Chief?" "Not much of my doubt in my mind, Chief Petrovic," said Kryscoff. "This woman has a lot of the classic symptoms of having more than one personality. She has some type of dissociative identity disorder. It may be too early to tell, but I think she has at least two personalities." Kryscoff continued to say, "From what little I know, Henry McCann seems like a fairly normal, middle-aged, well-to-do woman who usually gets what she wants. The other personality is likely Nancy Featherston. You did tell me a bit about her when we first met. Nancy seemed to be an uncontrolled, murderous psychopath who'd stop at nothing to get her way." "Well," Kryscoff said, "I prefer Henny." and chuckled. Despite this woman's serious mental problems, said Petrovic, I need to pursue the case to a conclusion. This is a murder case. She murdered some of the people that live in the immediate area that I'm responsible for. Now, mind you, it was a while ago, but I have to pursue this, regardless of her mental case. It has to go to the judge or the court. He said, this is, these body parts that dominated the community for the last several months. People have been gossiping and worried about it. I understand your concern, said Dr. Kryscoff, but you have to appreciate that Henny McCann is not a murderer. Well, this bothered the chief, but he said, you can argue that. But people were murdered and someone has to be held responsible. Well, Dr. Kryscoff said, I'm a doctor. I'm a psychiatrist. I did my job. You have my opinion. I will leave it to you and Fred Donaldson to chew on what you do and where you go from here. I will write a prescription for a tranquilizer that will dampen down her uncontrollable anger. And she may not like the effects of the medication, but it's for her own good. So that's what happened when Dr. Kryscoff, the prominent psychiatrist, came to interview Henny McCann, a.k.a. Nancy Featherston. So what is going to happen? How are her lawyer and the chief of police going to resolve this matter? Well, here's a little bit more about it. This is the next day. The next day, Donaldson was due to appear to meet with the chief because, of course, the previous day, the psychiatrist had interviewed Henny McCann. So he had sitting in his office and waiting. George Donaldson comes in and says, well, your ear seems to be in a pretty good state of repair, Chief. Well, Chief says, it hasn't improved my hearing, but thank you for noticing and for appearing to agree to meet me so soon. You're probably as anxious as I am to resolve this matter. I gather you've had a talk with Dr. Kryscoff, too. I have, said Donaldson. And I think we have 3 different agendas for the same person. You want a murder conviction. I want to defend her because I think Henny McCann is innocent of the charge, and Dr. Kryscoff sees a patient he needs to treat. There must be some common ground somewhere. Petrovic was surprised by Donaldson's response. He expected Donaldson would just say, I'm not talking to you. It's my way or the highway. I want her out of jail. Free to go on. She's done nothing wrong. But of course, Donaldson saw her attack the chief, so he knows that there are problems here. Well, so do you have any suggestions, Mr. Donaldson, said Petrovic. I was afraid if the matter was left just to the 2 of us, we would never resolve it, the lawyer replied. So I asked for Dr. Kryscoff's opinion. He did refuse to attend our meeting, but he did give me his thoughts in writing. Here's the letter he gave me. I've read it. I'd like you to take a look at it. So he puts the letter down on the desk in front of Chief Petrovic, and Petrovic takes the letter and looks at it. Gentlemen, I know we all have different agendas, but all of us are bound to serve the community and the individuals to the best of our ability. Henny McCann, in her present state of health, is a danger to the community. She needs to be confined to a mental institution where she can be treated for her illness. It's possible Henny may never again be healthy enough to return to society. That's unfortunate for Henny because I believe the guilty party in this case is Nancy Featherston. If we can deal with the Nancy Featherston part of Henny McCann in an institutional setting, perhaps Henny may be cured and can become a person capable of living in society again. The community also deserves consideration. We must make every reasonable attempt to determine what really happened. The public is entitled to know the truth. Relatives and friends and those deeply involved in the case need to have some closure. I am not opposed to a guilty verdict, provided there is no death penalty, and that Henny McCann will be eligible for consideration for probation if she becomes cured of her mental affliction and is deemed capable of functioning as a normal person in society. Sincerely, Alfred Kreiscoff. Well, that's a very impressive letter. And the two men looked at one another. And Chief Petrovic said, after seeing Henny's behavior, as herself and at other times as Nancy Featherston, I'm willing to accept that Dr. Kreiscoff's situation is sensible. I agree with you, said Fred Donaldson. I think it's necessary, though, that this case be taken before a judge and not a jury. I'll talk to the judge, said the chief, and I'll take the letter and show it to him. Donaldson nodded and said, please keep me informed about the results of your meeting, and I'll need to know the date of the trial as soon as possible. So there we are. That's where the case rests at this point. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.